Pawsit Podcast. I am Dr. Sam, and as always with me is Dr. Robert and his furry friends who are going to come in and out and visit us today.
It's Bronny's hanging out with us today, so he's very excited to be here,
Oh,
apparently. So,
good. Um, and with us today, we have a guest, which I love guests so much, and I'm particularly excited about this guest. I feel like this is one's a long time coming. So we have Dr. Rickey Walther with us, and he is a small animal veterinarian, but now you are the chief medical officer for Pawlicy Advisor, which I will let you kind of explain what that is, but we're venturing into the world of insurance today. And I'm really excited to learn a whole bunch from you. I know that I'm going to come away with a lot of information today. So I'm really appreciative that you came to visit us today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat on the topic. So I guess I can kind of jump into what Policy Advisor is a little bit, if that's a good place to start, and I'll talk
Mm-hmm.
a little bit about how I got there. So Policy Advisor is a pet insurance marketplace. So we're a licensed broker in all 50 states. We help all pet owners find the right fit for their individual pet, and we partner with veterinary clinics so that they can kind of outsource that conversation and not have to be an expert on the right policy for an individual pet owner,
Mm-hmm.
and really just recommend pet insurance as a tool for owners who are looking to have a different way to pay for their pet medical care.
Mm-hmm.
And so we created the website and really have built the product to help owners compare and contrast different policies and really kind of guide them through the very complicated nature of the insurance world, and specifically how pet insurance can be pretty challenging as well.
That's so awesome. I think that's one of the most overwhelming parts of the entire thing is that like even just as a veterinarian, because you're a small animal veterinarian as well. So like, people ask, well, should I get insurance for
Yep.
my dog or my cat? And I'm like, yes, you should. Okay, well, which one? And I'm like, I don't even have I know like three. You know what I mean? And they may not be a right fit for you. I don't know your budget. I can give you some clues of things that we might be worried about in the future given your breed or something like that. And I do think that that's certainly something hopefully we can talk about a little bit of
Yep.
like, how much does that affect things and what are the different options people have? But I can't even begin to keep up with
Yep.
all of the different things out there that I'm sure are changing like all the time.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And so that's actually, what brought me to my full-time position with Policy Advisor, was really trying to make a difference in that, that conversation that veterinarians experience, right? It is ever changing. It's not something that we were trained on, and there's a lot of kind of moving pieces. Yet pet owners really are coming to veterinary teams expecting that we know which
Right.
one to pick, right? And really wanting that direct advice. And any pet owner who's looked into pet insurance can Google pet insurance and look at a bunch of different options online, but they're going to come to the vet clinic and want guidance there. And so it's really about, I found in clinical practice that I was getting this question all the time. I worked in small animal general practice. Actually, we saw a lot of bulldogs and English bulldogs, just given the area we were in,
Yep.
and the rescue that we worked with. And so I saw firsthand, right, what happened when an owner was proactive and was looking at ways to pay for financial unexpected visit costs and things of that nature from the beginning, and what happened when that decision was not something that they knew even to make, and then ended up in a position where finances came into play. And so that's really what drove me to join full time, was how can we simplify this conversation for vet teams? How can we give them a trusted resource that they can kind of outsource this conversation to, where they feel their clients are being well taken care of, but not have to know the differences between the growing number of brands out there, and the differences in the policy.
I think it speaks really highly of the company that you're working with that they have a veterinarian there, right? Like that to me means that at the core we're actually trying to fix the problem, not just get people in a plan just to make money and then it doesn't even end up helping them. Like the fact that they have you there and that you've joined the team or you are, a major part of it, to me that speaks volumes. And I wasn't even fully aware of exactly how that worked. So tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, where did you go to vet school? How long did you practice before you you found this part of your calling?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I think it's actually kind of a fun story. So I went to UC Davis for veterinary school. I was in the Veterinary Business Management Association, the VBMA, while I was in school. Awesome. Yeah, so I was part of that organization, and actually was the national president for the organization while I was a third year going into fourth year.
Nice.
And that's actually kind of how I met Policy Advisor. So basically, when I was at a national leadership camp, the veterinary leadership experience, which someone in my group actually knew the founders of Policy Advisor, and they had reached out to him wanting, advice. They said, we have this pet insurance marketplace. We want to talk to veterinary professionals, see if this is something that they would be, willing to talk about with their clients. And if so, like, what are they looking for? And this was right after the company had been founded. And so, that friend that they reached out to wanted to be a cardiologist or an internist at the time, wasn't sure, and was like, go talk to this guy that I just met at this leadership camp. He's in business and in vet med, and he'll probably be able to help you more. So I remember I was actually studying for a GI block midterm, and got an email from the founders, and they wanted to set up a time to connect. And so we did, and they told me about this marketplace that they had created. And I was a vet student, who had heard about insurance from like student clubs, right? But knew that it was going to be a big part of what was going to impact my ability to practice, and didn't really know anything of it. So when I heard that there was a company that was looking at like comparing policies and taking that off of the pet owner's plate and helping them with a recommendation, I was like, this is exactly what we need in this space, right? It's not just doing it based on a brand we've heard of, but really looking at the details of a policy and helping to surface those. And so that was while I was in vet school. After I graduated, I had kind of, kept in touch with them and was helping them on occasion when they had a question or wanted to know which direction vets would like to go, like would rather they go as a business. And so I did that informally till I graduated, joined a small animal, 7-doctor private practice, and then immediately saw just how often this conversation was coming up, right? Like I get into practice, I have all these people coming to me with their puppies, and kittens, and they're like, how do I pay for this pet? And I'm super big into preventative medicine. And so I really wanted to, be proactive around talking about what could happen to their pets. So they were financially prepared and medically prepared for what was to come. And so I found that I was talking about Policy Advisor all the time, just kind of passively, right? I met this company, they're really cool. They're comparing policies, this is a good option. And I found that my owners really liked it because someone was holding their hand through that process and helping them. And I felt like I didn't really have to know the details of each individual policy to be able to pass them along. And so that actually led me to being their formal veterinary advisor for about 3.5 years. I practiced in that private practice for about 1.5 years. And then I actually was a medical director for a corporate group practice and tried my hand at starting a practice for them. Did that for 1.5 years, absolutely loved it, but thought even more just how, being in management of a hospital, how much finance plays a huge role in owners' ability to say yes to care. And so it just continued to double click on my passion for what Policy Advisor was building. And I was joining their executive team calls on a weekly basis and giving them advice and feedback on different choices that they had in front of them on how to grow with the vet profession. And from there, it just really made sense. They were working with thousands of vet teams across the country by this point. They were working on, how do we continue to activate this conversation in the veterinary space? How do we continue to make it seamless and easy for vet teams to have the conversation around insurance without the pressure of the liability of choosing a brand or not knowing exact details? And so we decided it made sense for me to come on full time. The team was growing and expanding. And so now I get to spend the majority of my day every day talking about pet insurance and talking to members of the company around, how do we create marketing resources and tools for clinics to use to make this easy to have the conversation, and to kind of demystify a very complicated topic that does really help many pet owners pay for care.
It's I have to imagine, Robert, like you must see on a regular basis just how useful this would be in a way, even beyond like, because I think you and I, being like kind of primary care doctors, we come at it from one sort of vantage point, right? Like we are, preventative care, trying to get like have them ready for what could come down the pike. And then, well, Robert, you are what comes down the pike, right? I mean, emergency medicine. So
Exactly. I think we probably get two very different questions. I think, and up to your guys' opinion on it, but like when you guys probably get the question, I'm assuming it's more of like, what's a good insurance option for me? Like, what should I consider? Do I need insurance? It's more of like, you know, those type of questions. Whereas when I most of the time get the insurance questions about, do you know if my insurance covers this? And I'm like, I have no idea. Like that's just like I don't know every insurance plan. But I think that's one of the reasons I really like Policy Advisor and really speaking of Dr. Rickey in general, is because you guys are unbiased. It's nice. I don't feel like you're trying to sell me on any one brand. I can be like, all right, well, what like I can hear a little more about it. And vets don't know all the answers when it comes to insurance, like all the unique traits about each one, because they are different. That's the whole point. Like they want to stand out, so they probably have a unique trait that makes them special. So having that information, having a resource where I'd be like, hey, just go look here. Like this will give you all the information you need to know, and that way I don't feel like I'm giving you the wrong information. That's all you need to know.
Yeah.
how many different, I don't know if you can say, but like how many different companies are there at this point? I mean, I don't even have a handle on it. There used to be like three, I feel like, and now there's got to be 20. I don't even know.
So I think we're in a, like, it's changing every day. So I won't be accurate on this when I say it today, but I think we're up to about 35 different brands. That doesn't necessarily mean 35 different underwriters, right? So some policies are underwritten by the same, but the underwriter is shared between different brands sometimes. But there are, there's 35 different brands out there. There's tons and tons of different policy options. One thing that I always like to kind of start with when we talk about insurance is that the ideal policy for any given pet really depends on the age, breed, and location of that pet. Right. And so that dramatically affects the price. It can sometimes affect, other pieces around those policies. And so one of the things that, is kind of integral to the way that Policy Advisor works is that the owner is putting in their information around their individual circumstance. And then we're able to give them customized policies across different providers and different carriers on, what are their options, and then help guide them through that process.
Yeah, I think that's hugely important. I mean, because just getting a generic point of view isn't going to really give you any sort of real context for what you're going to have to expect.
Yeah, and I think another piece on that point is another thing I like to talk about whenever we talk about pet insurance is that pet insurance is a tool, right? It's a financial tool for owners. It doesn't make sense for every single owner in every single financial situation, and even for every single pet. And so I think it's also really important, right, that like as veterinarians and as veterinary team members, like we're educating them on the fact that it exists, right? But not necessarily telling them that they have to have insurance or that they shouldn't get insurance. They should look into it for their specific situation, right? Because insurance, sometimes it's too expensive for certain owners, in which case it may not be the right option. Other owners, and I'm sure kind of we've all, heard this when it comes to anything insurance related. Other owners are like, well, can't I just save up money to pay for the emergency expense? Of course you can. That's amazing. Like if you can do that and you're going to, that's awesome. But also not every owner can, right? And so I think it's all about talking about pet insurance as a financial tool. And I am a huge firm believer that as veterinary teams, we need to be doing a better job of laying out those financial tools at those general practice, wellness visits, new puppy visits, so that when they do get to you, Robert, when you see them, like that they've at least heard that it was an option. One of the things that absolutely, I find devastating is when an owner had never heard that any of these things exist, and then they show up in an emergency situation, right? And so I think that that's what I'm really passionate about, is how can we make this an easy conversation to have, so that in the very busy appointment we're, trying to fill and cram with information, that it's something that they at least know exists, and that they could do their own research in a way that guided and educational, right? Less so marketing, and more so around teaching the owner what pet insurance is and also what it isn't, right? So what it doesn't cover, which is just as important as knowing what it does.
Right.
I think that's great because honestly, the number of owners that want that kind of information, because most owners like, no, there's maybe something pet insurance, but I think the adoption rate, and you probably have better numbers on this than I do. I think California's higher than most. I think we're close to like 5%, but I'd love to like, but across the board, it's an uphill battle. So like, what are
Mhm.
some of the big things you guys feel like you need to get owners to understand before, or in order to get them to adopt insurance?
Yeah, so I think that that's a really great question, and I'm glad you asked it. So, national pet insurance adoption, depending on which source, which as with every stat in veterinary medicine, is always a little bit challenging to tie down. But the pet insurance adoption rate is projected to be somewhere around 3.5% right now. That's up from over the last couple of years. The pet insurance industry has been growing in the mid to low like 20% year over year growth rate, right? So we are seeing a pretty extensive growth in insurance in the U.S. and it's still far lower than other countries like parts of the UK and other places in Europe have a higher rate of insurance. And I think there's a couple reasons for that and a couple barriers that exist in the US. One is just kind of general unawareness of it, right? So, like, not hearing about it until it's too late for that pet, right? So, hearing about it in an emergency situation where it's not going to cover what the owner's there for doesn't provide the same value proposition as it does if they've heard about it from when they were young. It's also was largely absent from employee benefits, which is now changing, right? So we're seeing pet insurance actually being offered by as an employee benefit add-on, a discount associated. Typically, it's a discounted rate through an employer, and so that's raising awareness, and I think that's driving some of the adoption. But I think the other piece is just kind of a progression and evolution in what owners are expecting from pet insurance, and so one of the things that I think is really interesting is that, when you think about an accident and illness policy for insurance, it really isn't covering routine visits, right? Routine care. They have additional routine add-ons that can be added to an insurance policy that are more of kind of like a wellness plan through the insurance company, that make it more useful for the owner on a regular basis. When we think about health insurance, we think about human health insurance, and that's very, very different, both from how it's written to how it's structured to everything is different about human health insurance compared to pet insurance. And so I think that's actually one of the biggest barriers is the misunderstanding or the assumption that they're similar. And then the reality, once you investigate them, that they are different and they serve different uses, right? And so I think that's where one of the things we've seen is that there's a couple of things that need to happen that really drive adoption of insurance. One is it needs to be embraced by the veterinary team, right? The vet team has to feel comfortable having the conversation, either what is it or how does it work or who do I go look at? Who do I use to go look at it? That at a bare minimum, but also, when is it the right fit versus not? Like having an answer to those conversations and being familiar in the veterinary community, I think will help with adoption. The other piece is really, continued innovation in the space, continuing to create policies that owners are looking for. And I think it's going to be that general awareness that it is different from human health insurance. That you're paying for the insurance company to carry risk associated with your pet, right? And so knowing that it's a insurance, like just like with car insurance, we get car insurance, we hope to never use it, right? We should look at pet insurance similarly. And know that there are other aspects of it that can be used, like those routine add-ons on a regular basis. But the actual insurance piece is something we're paying for the hope we never have to use it, right? But when the pet gets sick, we have something to fall back on. And so I think it's that general awareness and understanding that we need pet owners to get and grasp, so that they don't feel upset by the way that they experience their insurance plan. Similarly, we also need to know that just like car insurance increases in price as your car ages, right? Pet insurance does too. And that's something that a lot of owners don't know, right? Is that on those renewals, the price will change. And so that could be really shocking, right? If nobody told them that explicitly when they purchase a policy and that policy goes up in price year over year, we need to make sure that if they're paying for pet insurance now, that they know they will pay more in the future so that they want to keep it, or else, it might be nice for us to know the pet's insured for the first year and have that peace of mind as their, general practitioner. But if they don't renew that policy after year 2 or 3, and they end up, with, say we have a cat, right, that's young and healthy, and the owner's like, oh, I don't need this anymore, and they're 8 now and they have kidney disease. Okay, well, now that's when the insurance plan really does kick in, right, and really needed to still be paid for and kept. And so I think it's those pieces that we need to just kind of help owners with the complexity. When I say we, I mean Pawlicy Advisor or another entity that has all this information and can really provide, licensed agents that can talk an owner through those things, not a veterinary team member who has 5 minutes in between appointments. That that's not the right person to be having this complicated conversation.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious to you, just because you mentioned cats, and I was thinking about this before too. I mean, are people buying insurance for cats? I feel like when we're having this conversation, I have never had someone ask about a cat. And I feel like people think about it for dogs. We think about the back surgeries and I don't even know, ACLs and you know what I mean? All the things that we know are really expensive, cancer. But I guess the other question is, yeah, cats. I'm guessing you cover both.
Yeah. So there are insurance products for both dogs and cats. There are some companies that actually also insure exotics. And so that's kind of a newer evolving area of pet insurance where more companies are moving into that space. But yeah, dogs and cats, most of the carriers do have coverage options for dogs and cats. We see that pet insurance adoption is definitely higher in dogs than it is in cats. Very similar to a lot of the trends around, dogs going to the veterinary clinic more often, right? Or owners really grasping that they need continued care. Cats, I think, have always kind of followed that trend and have been behind that curve around getting kind of owners to grasp what goes into paying for a cat over time and what the medical care can look like. So we do see there's definitely a difference there, but there are cats that really do benefit from insurance. And those policies are structured differently from a price perspective, and they're based on cats and the overall risk and the cost of care, and so they tend to be different. Now, what is or is not covered may be similar, but that's where I also feel it's extremely important for us to be transparent when we're sharing information with owners. And so that's how we built Pawlicy Advisor, is we kind of surface all of those details around the policies into a way that an owner can understand, right? Like we've all read insurance paperwork, or I think many of us probably haven't read our insurance paperwork and just hope that it covers all the things that we want it to, right? But those are really big legal jargon, long documents, right? And so what we've tried to do is really build a user experience that shows them what isn't covered, what is covered, and then what is sometimes covered. And if there are exceptions or sometimes this will or will not be covered, actually surfacing what are the things that the people at that company are going to be looking at to decide if a claim is going to be paid. So we've been trying to bring that all forward, and then helping owners, right, with making kind of nuanced decisions around, is the insurance that I get through my employer the right one for me, or are there other options, and how can we compare and contrast those different things? I think the reality is that what is changing is the cost of care, right? So cost of care is dramatically increasing in veterinary medicine. And so as much as that poses a challenge for insurance, right, because they now are covering procedures that are more expensive than they were before, that is going to cause premiums to increase. That's a trend we have seen, right? Premiums are going to increase as the cost of care increases. And I think it also, what I've really been seeing at the actual clinic level, is that this is also increasing the need for financial tools and financial conversations, right? Owners, because that cost of care is driving up, they're looking for a solution, right? And for certain owners, pet insurance is that solution. For other owners, it's a combination of a couple different things: payment plans, credit-based solutions, pet insurance, aged care funds at hospitals. All of those things play together, right? And are part of helping owners with this rising cost of care. And so I think that the bigger trend that we have to deal with as an industry is veterinary medicine is becoming expensive to the point where some owners can't afford it on a regular basis. We're always going to be fighting with discretionary income in our field, right, in our line of work. And so it's all about how can we prepare owners for those challenging situations and give them resources and options that make it easier for them to come to those, to basically make the financial decisions and medical decisions that they want to make for their pets in the best way. I do think it will also create a trend in the insurance space of innovation, right? So continuing to innovate on how that pet insurance product plays with the veterinary hospital, and what are, like, how can we make that easier and less friction filled for the owner, right? We've already seen this happening, right? A lot of the pet insurance companies have apps now where it makes it really easy to submit claims. Some of them are partnering with teletriage services that like when like to be able to get advice and things like that in the meantime. And I think we're going to continue to see trends like that, right? And there's going to be a lot of innovation in the pet space. We're still talking about a product, right, that only insures about 3.5% of pets, right? So we've got a lot of room on how do we get that insurance percentage up and build innovation as we do.
Yeah,
And
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think one of the major things that I just hear you kind of say over and over again is that education, right? Is that bringing of the information and demystifying. I feel like this is like Robert and I are just beating this drum like all the time, because we, obviously that we come at it from the other side of, one of those other tools, right? So like when maybe we haven't had those other plans in place, or when the funding doesn't work out, or we have both of those things and it's still not enough and we need an angel fund and all that stuff. But the fact of the matter is that the more transparent we can be about what is available for people, and the more that people realize that, hey, when I go into pet ownership, this is a, many year commitment that I have, where I'm going to have this real bond, and I'm going to want to be able to do all these things and give them the level of care that my family member deserves. And so the more we can educate, and I feel like, because of my Balto, like, we've learned so much, and we're
Yeah.
veterinarians, and like we weren't even aware of all of these things. And I guess that your point, like some of these things are growing still.
Yeah.
But I think it's that education part, and just the more we can get out there and sort of let people know, hey, these are the things that you're going to come up against. This is what you're going to encounter, and these are the tools you have to work with. So plan ahead. I think it's so important what you're saying.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's one of the things, right? Like we talk a lot in veterinary medicine around preventative medicine, right? And like we invest so much time of those visits into things like vaccinations to prevent disease, heartworm prevention, flea and tick prevention. We harp on these things on a regular basis, but a lot of us feel really uncomfortable with how do we have the same kind of conversation around finances, right? Like I find that a lot of doctors remove themselves completely from that conversation, which is putting a lot of strain on our teams, right? We're asking them to have these really difficult conversations. And while that may be the correct strategy for certain hospitals, we also have to arm them with the information to be able to answer those questions, right? Like,
Right.
and I think what you just mentioned around preparing owners at the point of adoption or that first visit around what this means, what the commitment that they've made to this pet needs, and what that could look like. Because to your point, right, everybody has different goals for what they're looking for out of their pet. We need to take that spectrum of care into consideration when we're asking them, what they want to do medically for their pet, and provide them with a range of options. And we also need owners to understand that, like, if they see themselves as being somebody who wants that very high level care, right, they're the kind of person who's going to want the MRI on the down dog to understand why, right? Then they're going to also need to be able to afford that financially. And so, I think I've always been a veterinarian who's felt that it is our job to explain to them what are some of those things that can go wrong, right? Like, we know when we see, like, I'm sure you all both are the same. When I go to a friend's house and I see a dog that's like sniffing in a garbage can, I'm immediately thinking they're about to eat the chicken bone and they're going to end up in the ER and all those other things, right? But the general pet owner isn't, right? They don't see those things. And so I think it's part of our job to educate them on things that are common for the breed, right? Like I saw a lot of French bulldogs and English bulldogs. You can bet I was telling them all about airway disease and the fact that they have these airway syndromes that make living really challenging for them, right? And often cause lots of medical issues.
Yeah.
And like something as shocking as like, okay, for a Frenchie, an owner might say like, yeah, I know that they have trouble breathing, right? They maybe know that, but do they also know they get really bad allergies? And is that something that they've even thought about, right?
Right.
And so I think it's all about us. Like, while I don't think that veterinary teams need to be an expert in every financial resource that's out there, right? Pet insurance or otherwise, I do think we need to be able to provide the owners with a place to get that education.
Oh, yeah.
And to be fully prepared. And what I do think we need to do is help them to contextualize that, right? We can't just tell them pet care is expensive, because pet care is expensive means very different things to very different people.
Oh, yeah.
If you tell one owner pet care is expensive, they may be envisioning $100 bill, which they think they can pay for and they don't need any tools, right? That may not be what we need. We may mean that pet might have a $10,000 bill at some point in their life, or a $5,000 bill. And every owner is going to have that point in which finances are going to play into their decision. And that's going to be different for everyone. And so I think it's kind of our job, just like we give everybody different options and allow them to take different medical pathways, we still need to give them options that allow them to take different pathways from a financial perspective.
Yeah,
100% agree.
Yeah, and it's funny because Sam and I had an interesting chat last week on the podcast, and we talked about how breeds have like certain breeds are known for certain issues, and the top 5 breeds in the country have changed, this year compared to the previous year, and so forth. But do you think any of, unfortunately, some of those top 5 breeds are things like English bulldogs and French bulldogs and things that might have a couple more problems? Do you think there's some component of why insurance is getting more expensive because we're driving it that way with the pets we're choosing?
I mean, I think that is a driving factor to a lot of things, right? It probably is the driving factor for the average veterinary visit costs going up, right? Like if the breeds that are representative of who we're seeing in the hospital are changing and are more expensive to treat, that's a huge reason why those things are happening. And you are right? Like insuring a breed that is predisposed to a lot more conditions tends to be more expensive, right? And so premiums are going to be higher for that particular breed, because it is all about a risk assessment for that insurance company to make it worth offering that product.
Can I ask a quick question, just sort of interject in there with what you're saying? Because I feel like we can't talk about insurance without talking about pre-existing conditions, and we're kind of touching on that third rail right there a little bit. So like, for an example, and I know we can't get into specifics of policies, but I do wonder, you mentioned the French bulldogs, and they are like number 1 or number 2 in the country now as far as popularity, but like, is the things we know to be part of that breed, so the fact that they're gonna need airway surgery for sure, like 99.9% of them, is that something that will be covered because it's taken into account, or is that going to be like based on the policy that you pick, or you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I'm going to answer it the way I answer every single insurance question. Unfortunately, it depends on the policy, right? And so that's one of those things that I think is super important, though, as a veterinary team to understand, right? Is that every single policy is going to treat that slightly differently. And so that is something that they want to look into, right? If you have a breed that is predisposed to a condition, it is important to make sure that is not an excluded condition in that policy. Right. And also, it is important to also look at certain policies cover congenital diseases and others don't, right? And so that's another thing, right? There are some breeds that are highly predisposed to certain congenital diseases, and so that is something to consider. The one thing I can say is really that pre-existing conditions are almost never covered, right? And so I think it's always important in the veterinary setting that we don't mislead owners by telling them that insurance is going to pay for everything, because that's not true, right? And so it's always important, and what I tell vet teams all across the country on a regular basis is that the only thing you should for sure say is that pre-existing conditions will likely not be covered, because that the owner needs to know that, like, they're in your office. If they If it's a healthy puppy, right, there's probably not a pre-existing condition there. But if you're seeing that same pet for allergies or an ear infection or anything like that, and you're wanting to talk about insurance, which you 100% should and can do, we just need to make sure that they're not going to that insurance company thinking it's going to be covered. And Robert, I'm sure you've actually experienced this quite a bit, where owners get insurance on the car ride over to the insurance company, hoping it's going to kick in and work. And that's not how that works either, right? And so we want to make sure that we're not, creating that kind of misleading environment either, where we tell an owner, oh yeah, you should get insurance before you go, right? Most insurance companies have waiting periods. So at that point, if an owner is calling a general practice and you're referring them to ER, teaching the vet team to not say, well, have you looked into insurance? Like that's misleading, right? And they're going to be disappointed, right? There's other options for those situations, like payment plans, credit-based solutions, and others, right? Like, so we have to direct the owner to the right solution for them. But yes, with pre-existing conditions, it is one of those things. Like we want to make sure that they look into that. That's one of the reasons why Pawlicy Advisor, we have licensed insurance agents that owners can call. And the reason we do that is so that they can talk them through these details, right? They can tell them about what their pet is going through, and we can help them understand what may or may not be covered based on their individual situation.
And I think it's because maybe you guys had this experience as well, but like I've had a couple of times where I've really diagnosed the pet with something, and the owner will either email me the next day or even at the end of the appointment, be like, will you not mention that they have this condition in the record because I want to make sure like it doesn't count against my insurance? I'm like, that's illegal, guys. I'm sorry.
Like I'm not going to falsify the record because sorry.
Yeah. And that brings up another really good point that I talk to vet teams all the time about, right? It's that like we are not there to change the way that insurance works, right? And so explaining that to owners around the fact that medical records are legal documents, and you as a veterinarian are required to put what you see medically in front of you regardless, right? And so we want to get into a situation where owners don't feel like they need to force insurance to work in a situation where it's not going to, right? So, and I've actually found that those conversations actually come more from owners who are shocked or surprised by the fact that their insurance isn't covering something. And that is where I personally am very passionate on the pre-education that needs to occur prior to someone purchasing insurance for them to fully understand that, right? And so that's where I've had owners ask me, right, as a oh, I just got insurance, 5 days ago. Can I just not do this visit? Well, you already started the visit. The visit's here. I have notes about you. I'm sorry. Like, but that to me is a miscommunication with that owner that occurred elsewhere, of that owner thought that they could get insurance and then come to the visit, right? And so we need to help with that. And that's where a lot of our product team spends a lot of time and energy is. It's funny because owners want a clear recommendation and an easy process, right? They want to be able to go and look for insurance and get a recommendation and move on. Vet teams, and I think you both would agree, like we want them to understand a little bit more about that policy, right? So it's always a give and take. And that's actually one of the things I love about my job is helping to explain like what we do still need to really make sure owners fully understand before they purchase, right? And so that's one of those trade-offs that I think the pet insurance space is going to continue to grapple with, and we need to continue to work on it. How do we properly educate the owners to know when it's the right fit and when it's not? Because the reality is it doesn't help anybody in veterinary medicine. It really doesn't help the owners if they purchase a policy and then they don't keep it, right? If they're unhappy with that policy and that policy cancels, everybody loses from the perspective of that pet's still not protected, right? And that owner just spent money that maybe didn't really go towards anything that was super valuable to them. So I think there's all those pieces to consider. It's a really complicated space, and I think the piece I mentioned earlier around pet insurance being in a lot of ways more similar to car insurance than it is human health insurance is an important takeaway, right? And I think if we can contextualize that in our heads, it helps to understand some of the changes or some of the trends we see.
Yeah, I think ultimately, like at the end of the day, the most important thing in veterinary medicine, probably life in general, is that communication piece, right? Because the fact of the matter is, if you don't set up people's expectations, and this is as a doctor, this is in almost every interpersonal relationship you have, like if we don't manage expectations, then you're really going to end up with someone that's angry. And I feel like because we deal with money as such a part of our reality. So even when we're setting up, plans for treatment, or
Yep.
when we're explaining what our diagnostics are going to be, like we have to have that into account. And we also have to kind of manage people's expectations of like, well, what am I going to get from this blood work? Are you going to be able to
Yep.
diagnose cancer? And it's like, no, I'm not.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And so like letting them understand. And so the same thing with like, if I'm going to tell them that this thing is a tool that could help them, but it's not, necessarily, like you said, right for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that you also brought up a really great point, and something else that I think is really important for us to understand as a profession when it comes to insurance, right? Just because a pet has insurance doesn't mean we should just do every test we can, right?
Oh,
It's still
right.
about practicing on a spectrum of care, right? And so, like, I think that's what's also really important, right? We talk about driving costs of care up and premiums up. One of the things that could do that faster than anything is by us just doing more because we can, right?
Right.
Like we are taught and trained in veterinary school to do a test because it changes the outcome, right?
Right.
You don't do a test if it's not going to change the outcome. And so we want to make sure we're accurately communicating to owners, understanding their goals, and still practicing along the actual spectrum that they're looking for, right? And knowing that insurance is a possibility there. So that I think I wanted to kind of tie that point back to what we were talking about earlier. That is a way that the veterinary community can continue to help with this, right? Is
Mhm.
making sure that we're running tests for a reason, for a medical purpose, and because the owner really wants it from a goal perspective, and continuing to practice on that spectrum so that we can help keep costs down in general. Because we also want to remember that not every insurance product is 100% reimbursement. And so it is going to cost the owner something,
Oh yeah.
most, right? And so we do want to make sure that we're being diligent on those pieces, and helping, the best we can on those things, while still getting paid for what the work that we're doing, and valuing the services of the hospital and the team. So that we're not in a situation, I think everybody's heard of the situation where we feel, and I've dealt with this before, where I feel like I shouldn't charge for something because I want to help that pet, right? That's not a sustainable practice for the profession. And so how can we use these other financial tools to really help accomplish the theme goal of providing the care we want to provide for pets?
Yeah, it is true. I do totally take your point. And like, I think that I breathe a sigh of relief when I hear someone has insurance, because I'm like, okay, I can do what I need to do. But yeah, I still feel a major responsibility to not waste people's finances. And because I understand that, and I do think we have a responsibility that we've always had, and we have to really keep that in mind. But we also should not feel guilty for getting paid for what we do either. So I
Sure.
can't tell you, I think you've given us like just so much information tonight, and like I think you've really kind of helped clarify exactly what should be expected from insurance. And I hope that if people have questions, they can email us at podcast@mybalto.com. We would love to be able to kind of continue this dialogue. And can you like give information about like your website, and if
Yeah.
people have questions for you as well?
Yeah, so the easiest way to get information and to compare options would be Pawlicy.com, PAW, like PA. That's where basically all of the resources and kind of that comparison that I just mentioned on this episode, that's where you can find it. And then if you're a veterinary team member who's looking at learning more about this, if you go to Pawlicy.com/vet, we have a ton of different resources on there around how we can help have this conversation in your hospital, and really kind of, take that burden off of understanding the details, and really outsourcing that to an expert team that can assist the owners.
Wow, that's super helpful, and definitely something that I'm going to look into more, because I have been telling people about your website. So I'm excited to keep doing so. And I just can't thank you so much for giving us so much time, and you've been really generous with your time. So we've really enjoyed having you. And this has been the Pawsit Podcast. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks, guys.